This public hearing of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Public Works for the inquiry into the Department of Defence Blamey Barracks Kapooka Redevelopment Project, Kapooka, New South Wales. The committee's role, as defined in the Public Works Committee Act 1969, is to consider and report on the purpose and need for the proposed works, the most effective use of public money that can be made in carrying out the works, and the present and prospective public value of the proposed works. In accordance with the committee's resolutions of 31st of July 2025, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. I also remind members of the media who may be present or listening on the web of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. I'm Tony Zapier, the Chair of the committee. To my left, Mr Andrew Wilcox, the Deputy Chair, and Senator Josh Deleaga to my right, and then we have Danton Leary from the Secretariats. We may be joined by one or two other members. If we are, who will come online, I'll let you know, but at this stage we have no other members that have joined us.
Tony,
I remind any committee members participating via chorus call, if any do call in, to mute their microphones when not speaking and to give their name each time they speak to assist witnesses and Hansard. Participants on chorus call are reminded not to take any other call or put their phones on hold during the teleconference, as this may cause interference with the teleconference. I now welcome representatives of the Department of Defence to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would each of you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? Brigadier, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Brigadier Matthew Quinn, Director General, Capital Facilities and Infrastructure.
Colonel Gerard Kearns, Commanding Officer of the 1st Recruit Training Battalion.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Palmer, Capital Facilities Project Director.
Tom Close, Project Manager, Contract Administrator from Jacobs.
Matt Quinn, Contractors Representative from the Riverina Redevelopment Joint Venture.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that these hearings are formal proceedings of the Parliament. Consequently, they warrant the same respect as proceedings of the Parliament itself. Giving false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to a discussion. Brigadier, I'll hand over to you if you wish to do that.
Thank you, Chair. This project is essential to support the growth of a highly skilled workforce for the Australian Defence Force, which is a key priority of the government as outlined in the 2024 National Defence Strategy. Over 6,100 military personnel are trained at Blamey Barracks Kapooka every year. The annual training throughput at the base is planned to increase over the next few years, with an anticipated peak of an additional trainee throughput of 600 personnel per year in 2032 to meet government's direction. The purpose of the Blamey Barracks Kapooka redevelopment project is to upgrade essential facilities and infrastructure on the base that are required to train soldiers and will enable Blamey Barracks to sustain operations for another 30 years. The proposed works includes the upgrade or replacement of engineering services infrastructure, including electrical, information and communications technology, potable fire and irrigation water, wastewater, stormwater, gas and fuel, roads and footpaths. The upgrade or replacement of facilities will include 450 new living-in accommodation rooms with 4 beds per room, totalling 1,800 beds. A new physical training facility, clothing and quartermaster store, and recruit welfare facility. A new medical training facility and tactical combat casualty care training lanes. A new headquarters building and adaptive reuse of the Edmondson Soldiers Club. A new contractors precinct and land management compound. A new weapons range and explosive ordnance facility, and the demolition of redundant facilities. The estimated total capital cost of the project is $889.2 million, including a contingency of $42.3 million. The project will encourage local industry participation in accordance with Commonwealth procurement requirements and will provide opportunities for small and medium enterprises to deliver works packages. The project will also provide opportunities for upskilling and training to improve individuals' skills and employability on future projects. Defence has undertaken extensive community consultation throughout the planning and development of the project, including with Wagga Council, local Indigenous groups, technical and further education providers, Charles Sturt University, various community and business groups, relevant supply authorities, as well as members of the local community. Defence held community information sessions in Wagga on 5th of December 2023, 16th of May 2024 and 6th of August 2025. These sessions provided members of the community an opportunity to engage with the project team on any matters relating to the proposed works. Briefings have also been offered and provided to local, state and federal members. A summary of the outcomes from these consultations is included in the Community Consultation Report, which is publicly available. Subject to Parliamentary approval, the project is forecast to commence construction in mid-2026 and expected to be completed by mid-2023. Chair, that concludes my opening statement. The defence witnesses are now ready to answer your questions.
Brigadier, thank you very much for that, and thank you also for this morning's site inspection and briefing that you provided to committee members. It was well appreciated, so can you extend our thanks to all the team members who participated in that. Can I also acknowledge Mr Michael McCormack, who's the member for Riverina, whose electorate I believe this is in, and Michael, it's good to have you here. And I understand that Mr David Smith, the member for Bean and a member of the committee, is also online. David, can you hear us?
Certainly can, Chair.
Thanks, David. Well, let us know if you have any questions as we move through the hearing. Brigadier, I'm going to kick off with this question. Given the size of this redevelopment, $889 million, and the fact that it goes over a 7-year period, and I commend you for what you just said a moment ago, that you will be trying to engage local contractors as much as possible and wherever possible. Will the works proposed, in fact, absorb much of the local tradespeople to the detriment of other businesses and industries here in Wagga Wagga that might then find it difficult to get a tradie or a professional person that is going to be working at Kapooka?
Thanks for your question, Chair. Obviously, not obviously, but the project has been scheduled over a 7-year construction time frame for that very reason. Before I hand over to Matt Quinn to talk a bit more about the managing contractors, how they've engaged with the local industry, but I can say that the impact on the local community is tried to be managed in accordance with our requirement to try and get local industry involvement in our project, but also not overheat the market so that there is no tradesmen available to do other works in the region. That will obviously keep our costs down if there's too many, as well as allow the costs of other work going in the region to doing. Thankfully, we have the luxury to complete this over 7 years. And after I after I hand over to Matt Quinn, I'll also hand to Colonel Gerard Kearns, who can talk about why we need to do it over 7 years to minimise the impact on the actual base operations of training our soldiers. So I'll just hand over to Matt Quinn now to talk a bit more, if you have anything to add on our local community engagement with the businesses.
Yeah, no, thank you. So obviously, works at this scale, we need to make sure that we synchronise our delivery approach with what the local region capability is. And that's resulted in us coming up with a solution for defence of delivering it over that 7 years. That way we're not overheating and overstimulating the market, and making sure that those trades can support the local region as they would normally do so. We do expect that there will be aspects of our works that will be supported by regional areas, or outside of the regional areas from Canberra, Sydney and Melbourne, but we're wanting to give those opportunities to local guys, and so far to date we've achieved our target that we set of 80% local engagement, and we're currently exceeding that, so that's working out really quite well for us. But really extending a time frame that synchronises with the capability of the region. We established that through having information sessions over the last 3 years with industry to see what actually can work with them. So taking on that feedback is what's developed the plan that we've come up with.
I might just get Colonel Kearns to add about the operational base and the reason why the extended program works for the base as well.
Thanks, sir. Chair, for 75 years, the City of Wagga and the Riverina more broadly has been supporting the Home of the Soldier to build our army. 75 years we've had various upgrades to the base, and it's now at a point where we do need a capital infrastructure redevelopment. One of the benefits of extending the construction time out to 6 years is that it enables us to maintain business continuity and continue to generate soldiers to man the helicopters, the tanks, the artillery pieces and the units needed to defend Australia through this time.
Thank you. And I note that you consulted fairly widely with the local community. Were there any issues that were brought to your attention as a result of those consultations that the committee should be aware of?
Thanks, Chair. Before I hand over to Lieutenant Colonel Dan Palmer to talk a bit more about the community consultation, I know that there was a couple of issues that were discussed with us about one of those issues was the impact of flooding on the region, and we've done some extensive studies which I believe our managing contractor saw to as well. But I'll now hand over to Dan Palmer to talk a bit more about some of the other issues that I haven't covered.
Thank you, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Palmer speaking. So flooding in the Kapooka Creek, which is an ephemeral creek, is a concern, as is maintaining flow to a reasonable level. Many of the locals need the water for their dams, for their stock. The Kapooka Creek is part of the watershed of the Kapooka Garrison, Chair, and the Kapooka Garrison itself is 18.7% of that Kapooka Creek watershed. So we've determined that we need to improve overland flow or stormwater flow off the range into Kapooka Creek to minimise those impacts. So we have a number of design treatments that we've included, including 2 detention basins to slow leaching of that water into Kapooka Creek, but it will not retain the water. So those that need the water for their stock will receive water in those peak rain events. But to note, right now that creek is effectively dry. It's not a permanently running creek, but it does absolutely impact the San Isidore residents to the north.
Okay, I've got some other questions, but I'll go to the Deputy Chair and then to Senator Delegar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. So given the military heritage and the significance of this site, is this redevelopment respecting all that heritage?
Yes, absolutely, Deputy Chair. I'll probably hand over to the managing contractor to talk a bit more about how the design has done that. But I should preface that by the fact that we've referred this project under the EPBC Act, which included the heritage component of this, to the Department of Climate Change and Environment, Energy and Waste because we are actually demolishing a number of heritage buildings, and we wanted to show to them how we were addressing heritage through our project, which they have subsequently approved. But I'll hand over to Matt Quinn, who can talk a bit about how the design has progressed to ensure we address heritage. And I don't know if anyone else has some points to add on that as well.
You know, as you guys would have appreciated today, there's a lot of heritage for that Kapooka site. So what we're doing is actually unlocking some of that heritage on that site by providing opportunities for the public to actually interface in a greater capacity with the Army, particularly through the construction of the recruit welfare facility. That's actually bringing a lot of the Army memorabilia into a forward-facing part of the base, so that the families can actually enjoy a bit more of an interface with the recruits as part of that march out process. We've also incorporated a heritage trail into the works from the visitor car park up into that recruit welfare facility, where there's specifically 10 stops to engage community greater in terms of respecting the Army heritage and making it a much more pleasant experience for the families on that site. As part of our works, we will be reclaiming some of the cladding on some of those heritage buildings and reincorporating those with the works as well.
Thank you. So given the age of these buildings, and this project is a demolition and rebuild, given the age, I'm concerned about asbestos. Has there been, have you really had to look into that? And is there any potential for a blowout in cost in dealing with the asbestos?
Thanks for your question. Obviously, during the design process, we have identified that there is asbestos in some of these buildings, and we have The managing contractor, who I'll pass on to do any more details that I don't, has done a detailed cost estimate using a quantity surveyor to estimate the approximate cost of contamination in the project, whether that be asbestos, PFAS, or other contaminants. And that has been independently verified by our own quantity surveyor, so that's been checked by 2 quantity surveyors to try and understand the costs. There's also some allowance of risk provision should those costs be exceeded, which are across the project for any of those risks. And there's also been some detailed assessment done on the building to try and understand the quantity in the design process. And maybe I'll hand over to Matt Quinn here to speak a bit more about those investigations.
Yeah, I can certainly talk to the process, and we can delve into the costs if you want more for the information during the in-camera section. But an occupational hygienist has been engaged to inspect the buildings to understand what the known asbestos risk is in the demolition of those sites, and we do know that there's asbestos there, and there's been adequate provisions put in place for that. But there's also provisions within the risk provision of latent conditions for the unknown asbestos. We are not refurbishing the building, so our risk exposure to come up with unknowns through the demolition works is really quite low. That's something that you would associate with a refurbishment type situation. For us, our risk is really coming across something that's in the ground, which has got still the potential there, and there are specific risk provisions for there, but much less likely of a cost blowout situation that you may have experienced on other projects.
Thank you. And I was speaking to a soldier there, and in some of the buildings that you're going to demolish, there's been some experience of the toilets backing up and not getting away. Is that only pertaining to those buildings, or is there further issues with the sewer throughout that site?
I don't know who would be best to answer that question, but we've done obviously investigations to make sure that any works that we do will ensure that we have a functioning base at the end. So I'm sure the managing contractor will be able to talk about any of those further things that we've actually discussed.
I think from the site inspection you saw today that those buildings are aged and at end of life. They've got structural issues, they've got services issues. It's unsurprising to hear the feedback from the soldiers that they are experiencing issues. They experience issues with other service breakdowns, recruits having cold showers and those sorts of things. So that's unsurprising. The new facilities won't have those issues. So that's the reason why we are at a point where those buildings need to be replaced.
So I've been doing this for a little bit now, and sort of the 3 things that tend to blow out are water, sewer and power. So if we can just explore the power situation, given the fact that we've got a modern military and we'll be using a lot of AI, a lot of new technology, a lot of power-hungry gear, same as what our soldiers will be using. Everyone will have a device and talking to people, their loved ones, whatever. How's our power situation, that site, and will it be sufficient to accommodate not only the new buildings but the growing military that we all hope will happen?
Thanks, Deputy Chair. I think I can say that, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we'll upgrade or replace engineering services and infrastructure that's gone through a design process. So electrical, information communication technology, potable fire water, irrigation water, wastewater, stormwater, all of those things have been investigated during the design process. It's been quite extensive design process. We actually have a 5%, 30%, 50% and 90% design milestones, which each of those we engage with the users and get their requirements and taken into account into the design and get our design services contractor to do that. So those have all been taken into account to the design that we're doing to make sure that we have the functioning requirements that we need. I'll just see if Tom Close has anything to add on those design requirements.
Yeah, as part of the design we did an electrical master plan as well, and assessed the long-term usage, which included and made allowances for future technology. The forecasted maximum demand is 5.3 megavolt amps, and currently the primary supply to the base is 6.8. So in terms of I suppose the long-term demand, there's no upgrade required to the primary supply of the site.
Thank you, Chair. I've got more, but if it come back to
Senator Wagga.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the tour and the briefings today. I understand that you've been doing a lot of planning and a lot of work over many years to get to this point of the project. And can you just give me a couple of examples of what you've done to maintain or to meet the conditions under the EPBC for the facility?
Thanks for your question. I'll probably hand that straight over to Dan Palmer, who's been living this environmental referral process quite detailed. So, Dan, if you can elaborate on that, please.
Thank you, sir. Senator. Yeah, so in late 2023, the project was referred to the Department of Environment due to significant impacts to heritage and ecology. I know we've already discussed the heritage impacts. In terms of ecology, the project will clear 1.39 hectares of box gum woodland, which is a threatened ecological community under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. That was a mouthful. As a result of that, there was two things that we've undertaken. The first one, we've made significant modifications to the design once we understood in the early stages of design, Senator, that we were going to impact a threatened ecological community, where we've moved facilities in order to minimise that impact from in the order of 9 hectares down to 1.39 hectares of impact. And we've also, as a condition of the EPBC referral outcomes, we are required to have an offset conservation area, which we will establish on the range, which is box gum woodland, in the order of 16 hectares, which will be protected and improved. And there are requirements to maintain and improve that habitat out to 2046.
Thank you. And we'll talk about heritage and history. We're going to be, obviously, part of this project. You'll be demolishing some of the facilities, like we went through through Bravo's facilities, and obviously the cracks through the wall. They were talking about how you can see daylight at times. You know, the facilities are quite aged. How are you going to maintain? There's been histories and lots of camaraderie built in those. How are you going to preserve that when you move into new facilities?
Yes, Senator. So we established a heritage working group with the local unit with the first recruit training battalion, and that was principally around movable heritage and classifying the quality. And we've had a heritage consultant involved in that as well, just to make sure we can retain the heritage that is of most value. And then, as alluded to earlier by Colonel Kearns and others, that there is elements of other movable heritage up in the Edmondson VC Club, which will be moved down into the recruit welfare facility. So there will be effectively a heritage walk in the middle of that facility, and that heritage walk will align with the heritage trail, which will also include other heritage items from the base and potentially further afield, only if they're relevant to Kapooka's military history. And then the end of that heritage trail ties into the visitor car park. So the heritage under the redevelopment will actually be much more public facing, as we described earlier, and much more accessible to the public.
Thank you. And just when it comes to the welfare facilities, I understand these were a lot of these plans have been built alongside the recommendations from the Defence Royal Commission. And one of the soldiers I was talking with today was saying that it's not just about these facilities are not just about the welfare of the soldiers, but it's also about the new military families and bringing them into and getting them part of the community. Can you just talk me through this a little bit more?
So I mentioned earlier today that our role out at Kapooka is to transform civilians into soldiers. And at the moment, that takes us 13 weeks. And the opportunity for us to welcome in that soldier's family, loved ones, friends, to come out and embrace part of Army and be welcomed into our broader family is a significant step forward. As we recognise the roles of service life isn't just a burden worn by those who wear the uniform, but the family that support them through multiple postings, deployments, exercises, hardship, and growing their own family, sometimes states apart. We do that in part not just by ourselves and through something like the Welfare Centre, but again the outstanding support we get from the Wagga community in housing these families that come in every weekend and promoting things like our Victory Memorial Gardens, demonstrating military equipment through the region certainly demonstrates a lot of pride of the home of the soldier here in the Riverina.
Thanks, Chair. I might just share the call.
David, can you hear us? And if so, do you have any questions?
Certainly can hear you, Chair. No questions.
Thanks, David.
No questions at the moment.
Okay. Can I just go back to the issue of the flooding that Mr Quinn spoke to us about earlier on? And I appreciate the response you gave. What was the Wagga City Council's response to your explanation? Were they happy with what you're proposing? And don't have to go into details. Almost a yes or a no would be adequate.
Yeah, they absolutely appreciated the fact that the catchment here, which had been an issue for the local St Isidore community, hadn't been properly researched. So it was one of the things through our engagement we were able to get in early and actually do some flood modelling that had never been done before and share that with Wagga Council so they could use that as part of their development for the area and maintaining their responsibilities outside the Commonwealth area.
Okay. Brigadier, my other question revolves around the head contractor and also some of the other consultants that might be used. Have you already engaged the head contractor for this work? And if so, what was the process you used to engage the head contractor?
Thanks, Chair. This project we have gone to go with a contracting model which we call a managing contractor, managing contractor contract, and what we do is we engage them in the design early in the project in the design phase, and they manage the design through to a point. We obviously can't award the construction contract for this project until we get Public Works Committee approval of the project. But the managing contractor has, as part of that tender, has given it. We did an open tender to the market, and then and that was a two-stage tender where we sort of gave a short list, and then we went to that's correct, isn't it? Yep. And then we went to a short list, and in that process they give us a delivery phase indicative price, and that is subject to them performing during the development phase, and then some negotiations before we award them the delivery phase contract. So they are not yet awarded the delivery phase contract because that's requirements of us to wait for approval of the Public Works Committee. But they have been performing well during the design phase, and we've done extensive negotiations, and it is likely that if the project gets expediency, it will be awarded to the joint venture currently managing the development phase. And
if expediency is granted, will the head contractor be an open tender process?
So no, the open tender process was during the development phase, and now we have got a indicative delivery phase, and we've done some negotiations, and we have an agreement on what we would pay them to do the delivery phase. So that will be to the joint venture that's currently engaged for the development phase. So there won't be a further procurement as such. It's just a negotiation process.
Okay. All right. Look, Andrew, did you have any other questions?
I've got a couple.
Yep. Go on.
Sorry, can I just add to that answer? I should mention that the managing contractor contract is for the managing contractor, so they have a contractor work fee and a management oversight fee. But then the subcontractor procurement is actually is visible to us and paid directly by the Commonwealth. So the managing contractor manages that procurement process, and then the Commonwealth pays directly to the subcontractor. So there'll be a number of procurements that for the subcontracted work, and that's done on an open book type scenario, and that money goes directly to the subcontractors and not to the managing contractor, who have their managing contractor fee that we pay them to manage the contract through the 7-year construction time frame. So there is opportunities for local industry. Hopefully that didn't confuse people.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Has there been any PFAS identified on the site?
There has been extensive, I'll hand over to Matt Quinn in a second, but there have been extensive investigations on PFAS, and we are actually reconstructing the fire training area, and there has been some low levels of PFAS detected during that process, and that has been allowed for in our cost estimates to sort of remediate that where required. Matt Quinn, did you have anything to add on the PFAS?
Yeah, as you would appreciate we've done extensive site investigations to ascertain levels of PFAS to the site. PFAS is a legacy contaminant on a lot of defence sites. Through our investigations, we've found PFAS in the categorisation of Category 3 and Category 4. So both those categories of PFAS are in that lower end of the spectrum, as per the DG's comments before, which is suitable for reuse on the site.
And that's all contained at the present point in time?
Yes, it's all staying on site. It's not earmarked for any removal off site.
Okay, thank you. Part of this project is going to be a new clothing and boot stall, and you probably call it something. I don't know what you.
Store and quartermaster store here.
Yep. So the last one that we drove past today looks like it's an older style and looks like it's been repurposed and built onto, and it's a bit like a dog's breakfast, to be honest. Do you find that the new one will pick up efficiencies? Will that pick up?
Yes, absolutely. That's part of the process of the design. We I'll get Colonel Kearns to talk about the kitting process for soldiers a bit after this, but absolutely the design has taken on board the requirements of virtually a higher throughput of soldiers and made sure there's efficiencies in that design to make it much easier for them to put soldiers through that process. And I'll get Colonel Kearns to expand on that process a little bit more.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So over the evolution of training soldiers at Kapooka, the amount of equipment we issue them to deliver their mission training has increased. And ultimately, from a warehousing perspective, that means more connexes, more palleting and racking required to make sure that our people have the right protective equipment and mission essential equipment to deliver the training we do. Now, whether that's got to do with chemical and biological training, medical or advanced medical training like what you saw today, range practice, or like what they'll see on Friday, marching out as a soldier on Friday, there is a requirement to hold a lot of items. It is at capacity, and what it means is it can disrupt how and when we issue this equipment to people as they go through training. More floor space, better designed racking systems will make sure that it is a smoother process to meet the scale of what we've been asked to deliver under the ADF workforce plan.
So the question is, will the new building be more efficient?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we've got, has any of the previous soldiers who have been through these facilities been consulted about their experience in the building, and have we learnt from that in the design of the new building?
I can say absolutely. We have people who are currently working at the base who were previously went through the process of becoming a soldier there at Kapooka. So there was definitely I don't know if there's. I'll hand over to Dan if there's any further extension than that, but we've definitely got the eyes and ears and the people who have been through it before to put impact onto the design.
Yeah, Deputy Chair, Lieutenant Colonel Palmer speaking. The current staff, the EMOS Estate Maintenance and Operating Service staff that operate that warehouse were included in detailed design consultation for all milestones through the way to understand what the choke points were, apart from purely a kitting volume, 48 per versus 60 per platoon, as you understand that we've changed to. But it's also the functional design and the choke points and the physical arrangement for smooth running of the site. So we combine the current consultation with the current operators, contracted operators, with former soldiers. Major Dave Lee is a former soldier that's extensively involved with the site, and others that are also on security and estate group staff there as well. And put all that together, you get and some expert warehouse consultants, you get a much more functional design.
Thank you, Chair.
Josh, I'll go back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask about, I believe you've got targets for the use of local business and First Nations industry as well. Are you confident that you're going to be able to meet your targets or exceed them for including locals and First Nations businesses?
Thanks, Senator. We're actually very fortunate that the joint venture who's doing this project has already been awarded another 2 projects that are going to form part of the Riverina Redevelopment program of work. So that's 3 projects in the Riverina area. They're already well into awarding some works for the other 2 components of the program, and are currently exceeding their targets in both local and Indigenous. We can probably provide some more numbers, some specific numbers, if you're interested, but generally they're going well. So that gives us quite a bit of confidence that this project will also meet or exceed their targets.
Definitely, I think it's important that that locals are businesses. I'm sure the member would probably want to see as much local use as well, and businesses being supported. So if you've got any numbers there, Mr. Close, Mr. Quinn.
The target numbers are 80%, which is a very high number for local industry. So that's a target that we're currently meeting and exceeding with the delivery of the works at RAF-based Wagga and Albury-Wodonga. In terms of Indigenous participation, our targets for expenditure is 3%, and we're exceeding that target. And for Indigenous participation, it's 6%, and we're also exceeding that target. And our targets for Indigenous participation, both expenditure and workforce, is reported on the NOAA portal as well to the Commonwealth.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just going back to the demolition work, we were told this morning that 31 of the 38 buildings will be demolished. Now, that obviously is going to create quite a bit of demolition material. So, 2 questions. One is that I understand that you will repurpose or recycle some 80% of that. How will you do that? And secondly, given that some of that material will be taken away, what impact will it have on what I call the townsfolk as that material is carted away? Is it going to cause inconvenience or the need for roadworks in and around the Kapooka site?
So I'll probably hand that over to Matt Quinn to answer in a bit more detail, but obviously these kind of issues are something that we do consider during the design phase of the project to make sure we sort of don't impact the community overly. Obviously, a construction project does have some impacts, and we will try and minimise them as we move on. I'll get Matt Quinn to talk a bit more in detail about that.
Demolition is not dissimilar to any sort of other form of waste management in terms of targeting recycling. So it really comes down to separation of materials. So separation of brick and concrete and timber, all those sorts of things. They all get separated during the demolition process to maximise recycling, and that minimises the impact on community. Absolutely. So that is
Is it separated on site?
Separated on site before it goes off to the waste facilities, and they reuse it. So brickwork gets crushed and reused, so it has that return usage back into other parts of the industry.
My other issue was, and I should have asked this when we were out there this morning, is there any officers that permanently live on the site? Is there permanent residential housing on the site?
Chair, if I could cast your memory back to this morning, just before you came in through the front gate, we have a residential patch there for some of our staff. There's 52 houses there for staff and their families. And on the base itself, near where we had lunch, there is some permanent living accommodation for our junior NCOs, senior non-commissioned officers and officers to live in. I don't have the numbers on hand there, but primarily the living accommodation is centred around the recruits.
Yep, and so my question really was, what impact will the works have on their lives as well?
Yeah. Minimal. Some of those upgrades have happened recently. Now there might be disruption to services as things are reconnected over the 7-year construction period, but minimal disruption to our staff that live, eat and train on the barracks.
The living in accommodation we're building is for the trainees doing their short-term 13-week course. How many buildings? 6 buildings? Five buildings, so apologies. Yeah. 5 buildings are for the trainees. There is permanent living and accommodation that will remain, but is separated from the construction site, which is great.
And I also understand from your submission that there is going to be some workers' accommodation built on site. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's for the staff who maintain base functions, and we can go into a bit more detail of what those base functions are if you'd like, but there is definitely some staff accommodation for working accommodation when they work there on base. They won't live there permanently.
Again, for the benefit more so of anyone that's listening to this broadcast, how many personnel would be on the base at any one time? I assume it fluctuates, and if so, what sort of ranges does it fluctuate within?
Chair, it does fluctuate throughout the calendar year based on how many trainees we have in. We prepare the base for up to 1,400 recruits at any one time, 400 staff, and approximately 200 civilian staff that operate the fire, the medical and base services. So at any one time we expect around 2,000 people to be on base. That will continue to fluctuate as demolition and construction continues.
And once completed, the base will be able to accommodate more personnel, whether it's soldiers or permanent staff, whatever the case is. And I assume if that is the case, the ongoing maintenance costs will increase proportionately as well.
Yeah, that is correct. And in all our cost estimates, we do a whole of life costs, and then we are required to make sure that there's enough sustainment funds. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so the sustainment funds will increase proportionate to the increased capability that site has. So there's going to be an additional 648 beds for recruits. The clothing store increases capacity, so these buildings service are able to provide a higher increase in throughput for soldiers, so that changes obviously the operating costs.
I will say that the cost of maintaining very old buildings is usually quite high per area of unit. So the refurbishment of the whole site will actually have some definite savings in terms of how much it costs to maintain some of these buildings that are beyond their economic useful life.
Modern buildings will be properly insulated using LED lighting and all those sorts of things. So the operating cost per building per square metre reduces, but it's a bigger footprint ultimately and more soldiers going through.
Yeah, Brigadier, that was going to be my next question. I assume that there'll be some savings to offset some of the increased costs as a result of the new buildings. I think I've just covered all the issues I want to in the public hearing. Josh, did you have anything else that you wanted to raise?
Pretty happy.
I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, well that probably does cover all the issues that I want to raise in the public hearing. There'll be a couple of questions I have for the in-camera hearing, where we go into a bit more detail. Michael, did you want to say anything to the committee whilst you're here? If there's any issue that you would like us to ask on your behalf, I'm more than happy to give you the opportunity to do so.
Just thanks for the opportunity, and thank you for the evidence that you've given. I've long said that the Kapooka Commandant was the most important person in defence, and Gerard Carnes does that job admirably, like his predecessors. And I'm not just saying that as a local member. The commitment that this bloke does, not only to defence, not only to the security of our nation, but to our community, is second to none. And I want to publicly acknowledge the work that you do, Gerard, and to each and every one of the committee members. I know how important Kapooka is to the defence of our nation, and I know how hard I fought to ensure that the $889.2 million was secured, because the base was starting to age and the money was absolutely necessary. And I think the future investment is tremendous. Of course, it's not just for the here and now, but it's for decades into the future. So I thank you. I know the briefings that I've been given by these individuals has been exceptional, and I know that they've been very upfront with you today. And I look forward to reading the full transcript when it's complete. Thank you.
Just for a wrap up, I'm going to ask David Smith again. David, did you have any questions before we wrap up the public hearing?
I'm fine, Chair.
Thanks, David. Okay, with that, I declare this public hearing closed, and you will be sent a copy of your evidence to the committee today. If you feel that there's any transcription errors in in the transcript, please contact the Secretariat and advise them of any changes that you feel that you need to make. With that, I declare this public hearing closed.